Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa, France 24's program focused on the continent. I'm Charlie James, filling in for Georgia Calvin Smith this evening. And these are our headlines. Police and protesters clash in Algeria as the nation holds a disputed election. Demonstrators say the 5 presidential candidates are part of the ruling elite they want out of power. And France and Niger agree to postpone a G5 Sahel meeting until early next year. This after an army base attack left 71 soldiers dead in Niger. Polls in Algeria are closed in Thursday's controversial presidential election. The process has been messy, with protesters storming polling stations and thousands rallying in the capital. It is the first vote since former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika was forced out in April in the wake of nationwide peaceful protests. Critics say the candidates and election are designed to keep the ruling elite in power. All 5 men running have political ties to Bouteflika. For more on the potential impact of this election and the protests against it, we welcome Francis Gilles to the program. He is a senior research fellow at the Barcelona Center for International Affairs, as well as a former North Africa correspondent. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
So more than 24 million people were eligible to vote today, but it's expected that many were going to decide to stay home to boycott. Will whomever wins have any sort of legitimacy in the eyes of the public?
Well, I mean, this is the big problem. We don't know how many people eligible to vote actually cast a ballot. 20% probably, according to the authorities, which means less. We do not know how many people are not on the electoral list, because the electoral lists were revised in the last 2 months, but there was no independent checking. Thirdly, we know particularly from Kabylia, where some people stormed the polling stations and found the ballot boxes already stuffed with electoral slips. Therefore, we are not facing an election which is conducted in any way in a fair and transparent way. It is most obviously being rigged.
Do you expect this is just going to exacerbate the unrest that's been going on for months and months even further?
Well, the main thing, although we've had a bit of violence today, but not all that much, although we've had much greater repression in recent months, the wisdom of the demonstrators has been shown again and again in resisting provocation and avoiding provocation and violence. The authorities, for their part, although they've jammed this election down people's throat, have avoided bloodshed. So one can only hope this continues, because violence on a big scale would be in nobody's interest in Algeria or abroad. Having said that, there is a complete standoff, and it's very difficult to see how generals who are 70 or over 70 years of age, who are symbolic with the candidates of a system which many Algerians, maybe a majority, we don't know since we don't have free and fair elections, reject, can last forever in a country where more than half the population is under 30. And after 20 years of immense misrule by Mr. Bouteflika, one must add also that General Gaid Salah, who is the de facto head of Algeria, he has flung a number of people in prison, allegedly on corruption charges for being close to Mr. Bouteflika. But what of all the officers who've made money on commissions in all the weapons they've bought abroad? So we are in a huge confusion, a great mess, and I don't think that the kind of slow revolutionary fuse which the Hirak, the popular movement, has lit 10 months ago, will actually die down anytime soon.
One of the things that adds to the confusion for many people is that this protest movement is leaderless. And while they want the old guard out, there isn't really a clear picture of what they want the old system replaced with. Quickly, do you think that this is holding the protesters back somehow?
Well, some of the criticism is justified, but there are a number of personalities, lawyers, young lawyers, including one who was flung in prison a few months ago, the former Prime Minister of the Great Reforms of 89-91, Mr. Mouloud Hamrouche, who happens to be a colonel in the Algerian army, who have come out and said very clearly that what is needed is a transition period of 6 months or 9 months or whatever, where a bona fide government is appointed. And it is very easy, if Gaid Salah was so minded, to appoint a government of all the talents. There is a lot of talent in Algiers, and if people saw younger and some older hands at the helm for 9 months, I am quite sure they would believe that the generals were taking them at their word. But if we continue to have the candidates in the present elections who are nothing, they don't represent anything politically, they're stooges, they're patsy in the hands of the generals. We have a president, Mr. Abdelkader Ben Salah, and a prime minister who, in the Council of Ministers yesterday, I think it was, were sitting speechless and scared, listening to the General Gaid Salah giving them orders. So I think there is a way forward, and people would come forward if only the generals conceded that a degree of negotiation and change is important. If they dig their heels in, well, they dig their heels in, and the economy will suffer, society will suffer, and the risk of great violence remains. If that happens, the only thing one can say is God help the Algerian army and God help Algeria.
Francis Gilles, thank you so much for joining and sharing your expertise with us here on France 24. Now, final results for this vote are not expected until at least Friday, and if no candidate secures more than 50%, a runoff will be held in a few weeks. Also want to give you a little more context to this vote. The Algerian army has always played a political role ever since the country's independence in 1962. And following Bouteflika's ousting, Army Chief Ahmed Gaid Salah has emerged as Algeria's de facto strongman. It's a reality that has further angered demonstrators. France 24 senior reporter Adèle Gestel explains the army's political influence.
The Algerian army has been involved in politics since the Independence War, during which the military commanders sidelined the political leaders. After a power struggle inside the National Liberation Army, Colonel Houari Boumediene took the lead. On the French side, a soldier was also in charge, General Charles de Gaulle. And it's thanks to the support of one branch of the FLN known as the Border Army that Ahmed Ben Bella became the first president of newly independent Algeria. But not for long. His defense minister, Houari Boumediene, overthrew him in 1965. When Boumediene died in 1979, senior army officers chose one of their own to succeed him, Colonel Chadli Benjedid. He led the country until the Islamists emerged as a political force and nearly gained parliamentary majority in 1991. As a reaction, the military rulers cancelled the election. They urged Chadli Benjedid to leave power and appointed an exiled hero of the Independence War, Mohamed Boudiaf. He was murdered less than a year later, prompting a cycle of violence that lasted a decade. Intellectuals, artists, and journalists were killed. Gradually, the army neutralized the armed Islamist groups. Abdelaziz Bouteflika, a former foreign affairs minister, came to power in 1999 and slowly gained control over the army. He remained in power for nearly 20 years and prepared to run for a fifth presidential term despite his poor state of health. But Algerians massively took to the streets in February 2019 to call for him to step down. Senior officials were arrested and Bouteflika resigned. Now the strongman of Algeria is the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, Ahmed Gaid Salah.
France's president has agreed with his counterpart from Niger to postpone a meeting of the G5 Sahel coalition. It was set to start next week in southern France, and the summit was going to focus on stamping out radical extremism in sub-Saharan regions of Africa. But after Tuesday's jihadist attack on an army base in Niger, the meeting will be pushed to next year. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for the attack. Karis Garland with more.
It's the worst attack on Niger's military since jihadist violence began in 2015. Militants attacked an army base in Inates Tuesday, the same day the government extended the state of emergency declared in 2017 because of the jihadist threat. It comes after a number of attacks in the region this year, despite the presence of thousands of regional and foreign troops, a contentious issue for the local population.
These people are not here for us. It has already become very clear. These foreign forces are not very effective. They have to leave.
It is unacceptable with all the technology we have today, with our allies, with what Niger has at its disposal, that people can come just like that from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. and take the forces, destroy what they want to destroy, and then casually return home.
In the wake of the attack, French President Emmanuel Macron cancelled next week's meeting with the presidents of the G5 Sahel, representing Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania and Niger. They were set to discuss the role of the French army in the area, but the summit has been postponed to early next year. Jihadism has spread across the Sahel region since taking root in northern Mali in 2012. 13 French soldiers died in an operation against jihadists in Mali in November. 4,500 French troops are present in the Sahel as part of the counter-terrorism mission Operation Barkhane. The Malian army has lost at least 140 soldiers this autumn alone.
Finally on the program, Nigeria has announced that starting next month, all African travelers can apply for visas on arrival. President Muhammadu Buhari says dropping the requirement to apply in advance shows commitment to free movement of Africans within Africa. 5 months ago, Nigeria was one of the last nations to sign a deal aimed at promoting free trade on the continent. But in contrast, it has closed its land borders with neighboring countries since August to block the flow of contraband products. That's all for this edition of Eye on Africa, but do stay with us here on France 24. More news coming up next.